What's going on, guys? Welcome to the latest episode of Can I Kick It? Brought to you by me, Yogi. And into studio today, we have the coolest up-and-coming podcast, Ms. Courtney Stith. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I cannot complain. You know, it's Sunday. It's a little groggy outside. I had a flag football game, so I am ready to go back and lay in my bed.
I feel that I've been watching a lot of soccer and also just March Madness and also the women's game. So it's been a big sports weekend for me.
First of all, I want to say my condolences to UVA, getting knocked
really
out in the
sad.
first round.
I don't know how we won a national championship, if I'm being honest. Sometimes I think about it and I'm like, I don't know how we did this. But also, like, this is my thing. When we're going to look back at this year, all we're going to think about is COVID and like COVID sports. And I'm like, even when I think about sports over the past year, what's honestly the number one thing I'm still going to think about? COVID. So it's like, I'm not that mad at it. Also, we're going to do better. And like, I've also come to realize sometimes with college basketball and like implementing systems and things like that, you need to be in person. And we had not played together literally for a week because we had one of our players had COVID.
Oh,
we barely made the tournament.
That doesn't help at all.
It was a mess.
Yeah, that doesn't help at all.
Yeah.
Well, Courtney, I brought you on today's episode because on your podcast, Diaspora United, I think it was like episode 1 or 2, you guys started talking about Hope Powell. And it kind of intrigued my interest. And I was like, let me look up for her. And her story is kind of fascinating. So, of course, I sent the DM. And I was like, all right, let me see if I can get in contact with these guys and have them come on. And luckily we did. So that's why I have you on.
Thank you for having me.
So, I really feel like with Courtney, we should probably get started at like the early part of her career because there's a lot that happens with her, like in the early part of her career that kind of gets her going moving forward. One of the things that kind of stuck out to me is like, I think it was at the age of 11, she got told like, yeah, you can't play with the co-ed team anymore. Like they pretty much like kicked her off of the co-ed team. And that's something like when I read that, I was like, wait, what? Like, why would they kick her out? I'm thinking like, oh, she had poor grades or she got in a fight. No, they were just like, you're a girl. You can't play anymore.
The interesting thing about that too is when I was like doing my reading and doing my research, it wasn't even like they kicked her off because she was a girl, but like one of the coaches wanted her back because she was like really talented. And obviously we can see this because she's had like a fantastic playing career. So it's just like, I mean, it's just crazy to me that they're like, you're a girl, we don't want you, even though she was like probably one of the better players on the team. And also the entire backdrop of like not allowing women to play football in England in general. It's like, I mean, like, I don't know. I just think about what had happened if she was like, okay, fine, I'm just not going to play anymore. And like, like the historical domino effect of like, she actually just decided not to play football.
See, Courtney, you already getting into the gist of the show because we go down the rabbit hole a lot and I open up Pandora's box a lot. But like, that is like a great thing to think about because like, how many more women got affected by this where they were so great at their, youth team or like club team setup when they were kids, but they got told like for just a stupid reason, yeah, you can't play anymore. Like that's insane. Like how many future athletes that we've lost just because of their gender, something that they can't control, like they can't play anymore.
Yeah, it's a mess. And unfortunately, this isn't a thing that's unique to England. I know specifically Brazil, also Germany, France, Spain for a little bit. And also, if I'm remembering correctly, Italy, they all like outlawed women's football for like decades and decades. I know with England, they finally opened it back up in like 1971, 1972. But really that was a backdrop for a lot of these things. And if we think about like the global game and specifically like the women's national team, just like for the US just being like dominating. And like, to be fair, we also have incredible players. Like, let's be real, like, it's not like the players aren't great, but it's also that at that time where like there was no one in the States, to be fair, because no one really was paying attention to soccer in the States, but there was no one telling girls that they couldn't play. And so around that time when England was finally coming, like they had stopped, like it stopped being outlawed. Kind of similarly with Brazil and also with Germany, like in the 1970s, it was like women kind of are starting like being allowed to play football. At that time, you also see the passage of Title IX and how that has really grown the game across the board in the States. And so when you think about that through line in between them, and Hope Powell often talks about this, growing up, she couldn't play football, but she knew she loved it. Like that was her thing. Like she just knew she loved it. She didn't know how she was like going to be involved with the game because, you know, they didn't have clubs. It wasn't like anything like you see now. No, you know, no academy systems, no huge professional clubs, really no, like maybe you could be a journalist and report about football. But besides that, you know, there was really no path forward, but she loved the game. Luckily, you know, she got back on that team and really started playing, I think with Millwall ladies. And around the age of 17 is when she was like, I really want to commit my time to this. I still don't know, like, am I going to have a playing career? Is that even possible? Because around this time, it was like probably, I would say, 6 or 7 years after they had started allowing women to play football. And so she got a coaching license. And really up until she stopped playing, she was actually a coach part-time while playing football.
Yeah, I saw that. Like, I think she got a coaching license at 19, like super early. And then eventually, like down the line, I think in 2003, she became the first female to get like her UEFA Pro license, which is like crazy.
Yeah, she's the first of many things actually, and it's really interesting to me also that she was the first, but also she was like I want to say the first Black woman too, especially in England, and us seeing, for example, how white the game is now. So it's really, I mean, it is really surprising to me that, I mean, it's surprising to me, but also not surprising to me that she was like, you know, the first to get her UEFA Pro license. I think she was, I actually have it here on my phone. I have like a huge list of facts of things that she did, but she was like the second woman inducted into the English Football Hall of Fame. You know, first woman like to ever have a full-time, like the first ever woman full-time coach appointed for England women team, and like her effect on the women's game in England is huge.
Yeah, like her effect on the women's game is pretty much, she just developed the whole England's women's national team. I think like in 31, she got named the manager of the English national team. And like you said previously, she was the first woman and the first non-white person to get the position after Copeland quit. I think during qualifying or something, he quit. But pretty much she created the whole structure of England for the women's side, like from U15 all the way up to U23, the coaching mentoring scheme, and the FA's National Player Center at, I hope I say this right, Loughborough University. Like she pretty much is the reason why Lucy Bronze and all of them were able to have the deep run in the World Cup in 2018. And it's unique to see. Like she is the founder for this.
Yeah, and she has this one quote saying that when she came in, they basically had a team and a half, and then she was like, no, and so it really did establish that entire scheme, which is great. And she also kind of did something similar when she was appointed to Brighton Hove Albion's was appointed to be the coach of their women's team. Also, then like helped set up their academy system and things like that, because she's said a few times that she loves like teaching and nurturing homegrown talent. And so like a lot, like for Brighton, but also for England, she is literally the reason like that they have, you know, youth systems and things like that.
Yeah, like it's crazy to see like the impact she has, and you don't think about it. I always want to say she reminds me of Lincoln Phillips, who we did like one of our first episodes on, about how you don't realize it until you look at like how much her impact is on somebody. Like her hand touches a lot of stuff, and it's like, yo, without this doesn't happen. Without this doesn't happen, and it's unique to see. But what was the point I was about to make? Like, I think at one point in time, she even got nominated or like questioned about, did you want to become the manager at Grimsby Town, which is in, you know, I think League Two over in England. And she almost got the job, but then, you know, they went on, of course, to hire the man. but she was like very close to becoming like the first female manager in England for a men's squad. And that, in itself would have been crazy to see.
Yeah, totally. And that one thing also makes me think about, for example, Emma Hayes, Chelsea women's manager, she's a phenomenal manager. And also it's like, there was also brought up because she was doing so well with Chelsea. They're like, oh, is she going to be, because like when that happened, it was a question of like, oh, is she going to be the first female manager to take over a men's team and like, coach a men's team. And the interesting thing about that now, looking back at that moment, but also what Emma Hayes said now is like, it's like you can be a top coach in the women's game and still be a top coach. Like going up to the men's is not a step up. Like, and I mean, for Brighton, it's a little bit different because they do have a lot of homegrown talent and just like English players. But, you think about, for example, Emma Hayes is like, she has world-class talent. And so that like, to me, that comparison of, oh, well, what's the next step for them? Like, or that next step up that they should be aiming for is being a coach in the men's game, when it's like, no, the women's game is fantastic on its own. Like, and so it like, to me, that's like something that you shouldn't, like, it shouldn't be ascribed on female coaches of like, oh, like for them to be legit, they have to coach a men's team. It's like, they're great coaches anyway.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I think it was the case over in Germany for Borussia Mönchengladbach about how the U21 coach, I could already see like how the U21 coach it was like, hey, as a punishment, not like, oh, you're gonna 2 week suspension or anything like that. Like you're gonna go coach the women's team. It's like, wait, what? Like that's your solution? Like,
yeah, that I mean, I think a lot of people I know, for example, a lot of like Germany female players dragged him, like right, like, or not him, but the like the regional FA, because I think that's who made gave him his punishment. But it's like, coaching women's football is not charity work. Like there shouldn't be a punishment for you.
Like I really want to know like what went through their thought process with that. Was like, all right, we have these 3 things you can do. You can either serve a 2-week suspension, get dock pay, or coach the women's football team. He was like, women's football team, I'll take that. Like, it just like, oh, like I need people to think before they actually say certain things or do certain things. I need people to think. So real quick, like about her, I want to put a bookmark on like her England career because there's one other point that I want to bring up, but her playing career, and I don't know, maybe you could talk about this, but like it seems to be like Millwall Lionesses are like, they seem to have like every prominent English football player in their system some way somehow, but they never keep them for like super long. Like they get them, move them on. But that's what she started off at, and then she went to Friends of Fulham, who later turned into Fulham LFC, and then she went back to Millwall, which I found out she was the club's leading goal scorer, and like she was. And this is the thing, like I wish I could find more information about, but of course it's the women's game. People didn't really track stuff, but like the division she was playing in, was it the top division? Like was it like the WSL pretty much, or was it just like lower semi-pro?
Yeah. So basically, here, let me give you a scheme of what now the professional structure is like in England. So right now, for example,
before the podcast, I just want listeners to know that Courtney was like really nervous about being on the podcast at first, and I told her like, "No, I brought you on here for a reason. Like, you are the expert. I need you for this." And now she's about to become the expert.
I mean, it's hard to find the information. I would maybe call myself a baby expert, not a full-blown one. But I will say with the professional, and this is, for example, also, I mean, we have something coming up on our podcast about the diversity of all, like of the NWSL and then the top 5 leagues in Europe. So we're doing a lot of research into the leagues and like, kind of how they were formed. And so for England, you have it's officially called like the Barclays FA WSL, basically Women's Super League. And there are 2 professional tiers to that. It's the WSL, which is the top tier, and then the Championship, which is the second tier. And they kind of modeled it off a little bit of on the men's side of the Premier League and the Championship. But those really didn't become fully professionalized. They were somewhere semi-pro, and like obviously for clubs like Chelsea, Manchester, not as much Manchester City, but like Chelsea, Arsenal, the clubs that had really successful men's side and were like probably throwing a bone to the women's side, but because the women's game was so like stratified, it was like a significant amount of money at the time. But the WSL and Championship didn't really become fully professionalized until I want to say 2017, 2018, really around the time where Hope Powell was actually appointed for Brighton, because at the time there was 8 teams and they expanded to 10, and now it's where it is right now at 12. But yeah, for a significant amount of time, and this kind of involves coaching too, like having a semi-professional league. It's even though the product can be there, the fact that like these athletes have to hold other jobs and train in the evening, all of these things. So yeah, I can't really remember what your first question was. But yeah, with her with her playing career, it was like at least from what I can understand, it was like at one of the top leagues in England, but it was like also all these players were semi-professional. Even the fact that she was, playing for England's full team and things like that, they were still like the leagues were semi-professional. And even now, if you go to the lower leagues of women's football in England, once you go to like the 3rd and 4th tier, those are all still like semi-pro leagues.
Yeah, I think it was we did an episode on Mary Phillip, and like one point in her career, we talked about how she was playing a game, but she had to still like breastfeed her child at halftime, change his diaper. And she was like, she told the manager, was like, well, I don't think I can finish the game. And the manager was like, oh no, I'll watch the baby. You go play the game. And there's like this photo of the manager holding a baby while giving out instructions. It's like only in the women's game. Only in the women's game.
I mean, that's very true. Like that does often happen in the women's game. And I think one thing that excites me about the future of the game and hopefully the growth of the game is making sure that these leagues are professionalized, that you don't have to like hold a second job and think about, I don't know, if you're like in the game or something like that, and you don't have to think like, oh my goodness, who's going to care for my baby, or like all of these other external factors that can come in during practice and things like that, of like, how am I going to make ends meet versus I'm being paid a solid salary, especially like in England for the bigger clubs, like you can get paid a solid salary, and you can fully devote your time to football.
Yeah, and I think that's very important as well for for that next step to happen. I want to ask you this question because, of course, we talk about WSL. How is it over there in England when it comes to WSL and NWSL? Like, is there any real difference in how the leagues are covered or access to the sport? Like, or is it kind of the same?
Yeah, so I would actually say the two function very, very differently, and I think part of that comes from, for example, just the nature of soccer in the States versus the nature of soccer, like generally. I'm probably going to generalize a little bit to Europe and like the bigger clubs in Europe, definitely. Because here in the States, it's like, if we think about, our 2 stars, Crystal Dunn, Meg Rapinoe, Alex Morgan, they didn't grow up in a kind of a youth academy system that, maybe players like Lucy Bronze, Chloe Kelly did, and like even, Fran Kirby, they, like, our clubs function differently, where for most of the women's clubs in England, they have a male counterpart, and the male counterpart supports the women's side. And, for a lot of the bigger clubs, they now have this academy structure where, you go from like, let's say U8 to, U10, U11, like it goes all the way up until you are, U23s, and then you hit the first team. But here in the States, that is not the way it is, just from our structure. So it's like we have, big individual club plays, and then, normally a lot of those top players go play in college and then either go to the NWSL, they can go to the WPSL. There's a second, it's not related, but there's like another soccer league for women here in the States that I just can't remember off the top of my head. And then let's say you graduate college and you either go and then you can go into the NWSL or go to Europe, something like that. And so it's like completely different because for a lot of these players, you get it's just completely different. Like you're tied to a club, and for the bigger clubs, like that means you have access to really great facilities and things like that. And while in the NWSL, they want to grow and they want to have world-class facilities and stuff like that. But for example, if you go for Chelsea or for Arsenal and their youth system and things like that, like you have access, once you get to a certain age, obviously, but like you have access to all of those world-class facilities. Like I know, for example, one thing, I don't know why this just popped in my head, but like Carly Lloyd went and played for Manchester City for a few seasons. And one of the things that she loved about there was like, she had access to all of Manchester City's men's team's facilities, which are, huge and world-class and all of these things. And it's like the women, and to be fair, not necessarily all of them have it. Like there are clubs that don't do that, cough, cough, Liverpool, where their women's team don't have access to those facilities. But I would say for, the way the two leagues came up is completely different. And that, while I would say the style of play isn't hugely different, but the way soccer is treated in both countries and the way a young person can get to a professional level is completely different.
And, no, go continue your point. Like, look,
sorry,
this is great. I am listening.
I was also going to say, for example, that when those, but also like we're looking, back at the past, and hindsight is 2020. But there are also, for example, players that who are in England who came over to play here in the States either for college or something like that, because those systems might have not been in place, or they might have, not been great.
Okay. So that I get that. That does make some sense. You did bring up Liverpool, and I didn't know this maybe like a couple of months ago about how you look at the men's side for Liverpool, and like how they, all fairness on like won the Premier League, all this money has been pumped into them. But like the female side, it's like they're on like a super like shoestring budget, and it just shows you like even with the owning groups, like they kind of know who they prioritize.
Right. And it's like one thing with that too, because how LeBron bought into Fenway Sports Group, who owns Liverpool. And it's like, and one thing that I really appreciated, it was out of the New York Times, I think it was like Liverpool just won the Champions League, which is like so huge, all this stuff. But their women's team got relegated the same season. And it's like, you have this huge influx of cash, all this stuff. Like they just made a brand new training ground. I can't remember the name of it. The women's team don't even have access to it. The women's team, in particular, like share another club's, like they don't even have their own like Liverpool women dedicated stadium. They share a stadium with another club. The way they are running it is absolutely terrible. And when LeBron James bought into Fenway Sports Group, and he was like, I want to make a WNBA team, I want to have an NWSL team. It's like, yes, like we've been asking for, or not even asking for, we've been calling for investment in the women's game, across all sports for a very, very long time. But it does bring some pause when it's like, you already have a women's team and you're not supporting them, and their budget, and like when you think about the budgets of women's teams compared to men's teams, like a women's team probably have 1/10 even, that might even be too much of like the men's team's operating budget. And it's like, if you think about, for example, the biggest transfer in world football history, which I'm 90% sure is Neymar.
It's Neymar.
Yeah, and he went for what, like 200, like over 200 million
more than I would make on a teacher salary. Let's put it like
that. I mean, true. I think it was like all of our money put together almost. But he went for, over $200 million. And Chelsea got the largest women's transfer, and her transfer was, I think, $350,000. Like if we're talking about like the difference, I don't know, between I think of like the Earth and then like Pluto, like tiny old Pluto or something. Like the change is ridiculous. And it's like, if you can't support your women's team, which is probably, out of all their prize winnings and all that stuff, it's a drop in the bucket, then it's like, it gives you pause of like, how would you, grow an NWSL team and a WNBA team, make them profitable, give them and also give them enough resources to be profitable. Like the women's game in this country is great, but part of it is like a little bit because of subsidizing with US soccer, but like they've been doing these great things on tiny, tiny budgets. Like imagine the product and all the players and all of these things if they could actually be funded in the way they should be. I'll get off my soapbox.
Yeah. No, hey, look, I love it. I love it. As someone that's like advocate for people to like speak up for what they really believe, and like as someone that's on Twitter that stand up on this soapbox a lot, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. But yeah, like it seems like there's only like a few teams where the men's side actually gets supported by the women's side, and like for case in point, like Lyon. Like Lyon's women's team to me is more important than the Lyon's men's side. Just about like how competitive they are with winning Champions League, and like Bayern Munich makes like a certain effort to support the women's squad. From what I've seen, and maybe I'm wrong in that, but the only team in England I can think of that really like goes in on supporting their women's side is Manchester City. That's the only one I can really think of.
Oh, I mean, Arsenal and Chelsea and even Manchester United have. I mean, Manchester United has been like they didn't have a team, then they brought it back, I think, in 2017. But I mean, they've Christian Press and Tobin Heath. Like I would say probably like not necessarily the big six, but like I would definitely say out of all the teams, I mean, honestly, all the teams I would say are like in the WSL right now are relatively supported by their men's club. Like, but I mean, talking about teams that are like really, really supporting, it definitely is like Chelsea, Arsenal, Manchester City, Manchester United, Everton at points. But also, for example, and kind of tying it back to Hope Powell, is that when she came to Brighton, they were in the second tier. And then when the first tier like opened up a little bit and they wanted more clubs in, they, kind of secured promotion through some application. But one thing that she has said many times in interviews is that she is getting the support in like through Brighton and through, the board and the men's team and things like that. It just kind of looks a little bit different because I think and like, to be fair, even though Brighton is in the men's side is in the Premier League, like there's definitely, a big difference in probably operating budget and things like that between a Manchester City and a Brighton. But one thing that Hope Powell has said over and over again is that she came because she like missed coaching, but also that the way Brighton is doing it is to making it sustainable. So instead of doing something, let's say that Manchester United did and like brought their club dropped money into it, like Brighton is doing it kind of Brighton's way where they're making it more sustainable. And I think, and I mean, it's definitely been working. Like Brighton, I think, are 5th or 6th in the WSL, where I would say at one point earlier in the season, they were hovering kind of in the bottom, and now they're, unless something crazy happens, like they should be set for next season. And I think they really just want to grow on momentum instead of kind of doing something that some of the big clubs in Europe do, where it's like they drop in a ridiculous amount of money and then want results immediately, when we know in the game of soccer, it doesn't really happen like that.
Yeah, people really end up thinking that like, oh, I'll put a whole bunch of money on it. Let's do it like FIFA. Like, no, it doesn't work like that.
Right.
It doesn't work like that. So like keeping it on Hope Powell, like how did she end up at the Brighton Hove Albion job is because of there were some controversy with her with the England national job. Even though she had success with England, like leading the Great Britain women's team in the Olympics, also with pretty much she led England to the Olympics with Great Britain and then the Euros.
Also World Cup got their 2 best finishes.
World Cup as well. Yeah, World Cup as well. But there were some haters in the group. There was some haters around. Of course, there's always when a black woman's in charge. Keith Bononis, I'm assuming that's his last name. I'm trying my hardest with it. Pretty much he was outspoken about. But he was pretty much outspoken against her just for the mere fact of, one, he hated the fact that he assumed that Hope Powell had something to do with his wife getting pushed out of the national team. There's no way to really, but he was just getting pushed out. And then secondly, he criticized Hope Powell because he thought the only reason why she got the job was because England was trying to be politically correct and wanted to hire a woman of color. So it's like, dude, why are you hating for? Like, why are you upset that this woman that was good and got the license, got everything, got all the qualifications, got the job ahead of you? Like, why are you salty?
Right. And I pulling up this one thing, she was interviewed for this thing called The Coach's Voice. It's not, I'm assuming it's like, kind of a sort of media organization. And she also, that way that when she was appointed, it was kind of a token gesture of like, she's Black, she's a woman, like, this is going to be great. Like, like in today's speak, I would say like, none of the wokes are going to come after us or something like that. And so she like said that she felt a little tokenized, and the one thing that made her get the job, and I want to read this quote, was one of the people said that she talked to said like, well, you're going to be in the changing room with someone else talking, and you're going to think like, I can do better than this, so that's why you should take the job. And then the other person said, if you don't take this, I'm gonna can I curse on here?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay, I said, I'm gonna kick the living shit out of you if you don't take this job, which to me was really funny. And then she was like, well, I guess I'm gonna sign up. And I mean, she really did have, a lot of success.
She's trying to get a job with like the English mafia or something? Like what? Like, threatening her with violence. It's crazy.
I think it was so it was one of her friends. It was kind of like a playful thing of like, if you don't take this, like, you need to take this job. You're, 100% qualified for it, all of these things. And I mean, she did have, a good amount, like a really good amount of success. And even if you think about, some of the low points and, not necessarily having the best performances, like when she left in 2013, it was after, they had a particularly like poor performance. They had a particularly poor performance. I think it wasn't in the World Cup. I think it might have been in the Euros after like putting together this huge campaign or things like that. And she, in this piece, talks about like she was feeling a lot of levels of burnout and all these things. But even if you talk about, the low of that moment and the low of her getting fired from that job, it's still, when you look back, you see all of the infrastructure she put in place, how much she really wanted to grow the game in England, and how, like, honestly, she really did help grow the game in England. Like, what is it? Ellen White, I think Jill Scott got her 150th cap recently. And she was one, and like, Jill Scott's a huge player in England. And like, she gave Jill Scott, her first call up, things like this, like put in, like, I just think about even the lows of how she left the job, there were still a lot of highs and like a lot of things that she did that really helped establish the game in England, like at least from the national team level.
Yeah, I definitely see that. It almost kind of reminds me of like how I can't remember the announcer's name, but the coach before Steve Kerr got to Golden State, like it kind of reminds me of that situation of how like you can tell like that's supposed to be his team and like his team are winning titles, but he's not really getting the glorification of it. But like everyone that kind of covers it, everybody knows like without him, you're not having any of the success.
Right. And
so
I think,
anything else on Hope? Oh, you better say something?
Oh yeah, sorry. No, yeah, I was gonna say, and I think with women's soccer in general, like the putting together the infrastructure, and if we think back, even just and I mean, Title IX obviously has its problems, and we've really seen that in the difference between the men's March Madness tournament, and I'm also calling it the women's March Madness tournament because it's March and it's madness. But you can really tell the difference of the importance that infrastructure and funding has, and even just being able to set up like a U15, a U17, a U19, U21 systems for the national teams is absolutely huge. Because that, like, I mean, if you think about, for example, player pools and having players move up, and we think about this a lot of times here in the States with the NWSL, but also, for example, I'm going to give out like a shout out to Trinity Rodman, who was just drafted to the Spirit. And it was like, she hadn't played a minute in college soccer, which is like kind of crazy to think about, but it happened because of COVID. But for example, like the Spirit saw all that she did in the youth systems in the youth national teams. And we're like, we've seen enough from you to know that you can be a star for this team eventually. And like, we want to bring you into the system. And so you can see the importance of the infrastructure in growing the game and also in like, making the game better.
I do want to ask you about what was the question? I just had it on the tip of my tongue. Actually, it was two questions. Now I remember. The first question is, you mentioned something about like the big five leagues in Europe. Like, what are those? Like, what are the big five leagues in Europe? And then the second question was like, when they talk about like infrastructure and stuff, like this past week, I know we had women's UEFA Champions League coming on, but unlike the men's, where it's all in one place, it's kind of organized. It was kind of hard to kind of follow where the women's game were because I think like the PSG Lyon game was on BN and then the Chelsea game was on like their YouTube page. Like, can you just talk about like why is it what the Women's Champions League was supposed to be like the biggest club competition in sports? Why is that like all over the place and not organized as much?
Yeah. So for that, it's probably the simple, like a simple answer, but at least, and I'm talking about specifically like people for us watching the States, because, you know, with like world football, like one place in the States will carry it. And then like if you go to other places, like other networks and stuff will carry it, but no one has, at least my understanding of what I've seen, no one in the States has picked up all of the coverage for the Champions League. So, for example, on the men's side, like CBS has all of it. So they have, I don't know if they have the Champions League like qualifiers before they get to the group, like for them to get to the group stage. But once you get to the group stage, you get group stage. What is it? Round of 16, quarterfinals, semifinals, all that stuff. CBS owns all of that, so it's like you're able to find it in one localized place. But, and I would say kind of, unfortunately, generally in women's football, at least on the European side, because luckily CBS has access to the NWSL, which means you can just go to, you know, Paramount Plus, or if they're broadcasting it like on CBS, like you can just turn on the TV and it'll be there, which we love. But on the women's side in England and in the rest of Europe, it's kind of like I don't know, to me, kind of like a haberdashery of different things. So, for example, for the WSL, you can either watch it through Ada Football, which like picks up rights for very specific matches. So Ada Football picked up the rights for, like today, they picked up the rights for Chelsea versus Aston Villa. And since the men's side of the game is on an international break, like I was able to turn on NBCSN and like watch it there, which was great. It's some technical problems, but you know, there's so much you can do. And so on the women's side, they have, I think they're, for the most part, are rights for domestic leagues, but they haven't actually figured it out for the Champions League yet. And so since they have Ligue 1 on the men's side, and then I think they might have the rights to the women's side. I'm not 100% sure because I only really see it if they're broadcasting it, because like ESPN for some reason has US rights for that. But it's basically, like, long story short, it's just like a mismatch of things. And I can't really explain why someone hasn't bought all of the things for the Champions League. Because I know last season, actually, CBS All Access had, I think, the semifinals and the finals, which was nice. So you could just like turn on CBS or like go to their app or something and watch it. This time, there's like, I mean, it probably just comes to like either deciding to make an investment or something like that. So yeah, it's very annoying. And to me, there isn't like an exact clear answer of why someone hasn't been like, hey, let me go, or at least like even just in the States, like, hey, let me go pick up all of these rights for the Champions League. But on the league side, I know at least for the WSL, you can either watch it at a football or the FA Player app because they broadcast all of their games.
What are the top 5 women's league in European football?
Yeah, and so with that, I went off of like kind of UEFA decides it as like with the coefficient, things like that. And off the top of my head, I mean, I could pull it up, but when I think about it, and like also thinking about, for example, on the men's side, who is really investing in their women's game. So for me, at least, and also like who's often in the like the later stages of the Champions League. It's the WSL, which is England, the Frauen Bundesliga, which is Germany, the French Women's League. Their name escaped me. Spain's women's league. It's technically called, it's like Primera Iberdrola, I think is the official name. And then I can't remember if it's the other one is Italy or if the other one is Sweden. But I would say, like, for example, those are the leagues that have teams that are often in, like, you know, the later stages of Champions League. Like, you can actually look up what like, UEFA has a ranking for them. But those are the ones that I'm remembering off the top of my head. Also, the one thing that I do want to add about the difference between the leagues in Europe and the leagues in, like, the NWSL here and Liga MX Femenil is that in Europe, they have, you know, structures like the Champions League where you can, you know, play teams from other leagues and things like that. And here in North America, that hasn't been established yet on the women's game. Even though I think they're trying to establish it, and there might be some reporting around it. But yeah, there's, like, nothing there. And even, I mean, in England, they have, like, the FA Cups, in a lot of the European leagues, they have, like, a version of, like, an FA Cup or their Club Cup or something like that, where they're, you know, playing between different leagues and stuff like that. But here in the States, we don't have any type of cup competition now outside of, like, the Challenge Cup, which kind of started last year and that people really liked. But there was no kind of like intra-season or inter-season, like, competition going on in addition to league play that they do have in England, France, Germany, and probably in Spain and definitely in Spain as well.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm sorry to cut you off earlier. That was on me. You're the expert.
Oh, no, it's okay. Honestly, it's Wi-Fi, so I was like, sometimes I'll start speaking and then realize it hasn't gone to you yet. Like, it hasn't, like, transited to your computer.
No, it's okay. I think this is a stream way of telling us that we gotta, like Dave Chappelle did on his scale, like, wrap it up. Like, I think, you know, internet's telling us that. But Courtney, man, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to coming on our show. Where can everyone reach out to you at? And also, like, do you mind telling the listeners about the dope podcast that you have?
Sure. So for me and my work, you can find me on Twitter at Courtney Stith, which is just my first and last name together, no underscores or anything, just at Courtney Stith. And then you can find my podcast at, it's called Diaspora United. It's something that myself and my co-host Andre Carlisle host each week, or, you know, kind of every 2 weeks, where we uplift Black women in the global game. We have really good interviews. We also do some league play and things like that. And we have a lot of really cool stuff coming. And for that, you can find us on Instagram and Twitter at Diaspora UTD POD. So I'm just going to say that again, Diaspora, and then it's UTD POD.
Well, listeners, we just want to say thank you for taking the time today to listen to us. As always, you can listen to the podcast on your podcast feed. If you want to become a supporter of the podcast, you can do so at the link down below for the minimum fee of $1 a month, which, you know, that's $12. That's about what Chick-fil-A costs. You'll be fine. Help us out.
Chipotle
yeah, right. You know, $12 is enough. But thank you again, Courtney, and listeners, we will talk to you guys later.